Three lost children follow a mysterious dog and find an elderly woman trapped in rubble after a devastating flood. What seemed like tragedy turned into an inexplicable miracle when they discovered ancient prophecies and waters with healing powers. A journey of faith that challenged science and transformed an entire community. The dog with the St. Francis medal vanished, leaving only its divine mark. Prepare yourself for this moving story of spiritual redemption. Like, share, and comment. Do you believe in angels in disguise? The sky wept over Harmony Springs that autumn afternoon. Heavy drops struck the ground as if the heavens themselves shared the pain that would soon spread through the quiet town. Known for its thermal springs that healed wounds of the body and soul, Little Harmony Springs housed devout souls among its residents, people who found in the sacred waters a reflection of divine goodness. However, on that day, the same waters that brought life overflowed in fury, as if nature wanted to test the faith of those who trusted so deeply in the Lord's designs. High on the steepest hill, in a wooden house worn by time, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a 78-year-old woman with deep wrinkles that told stories of a life dedicated to others, watched the intensifying storm through the window. Her blue eyes, still bright despite her age, reflected concern while her wrinkled hands held a well-used rosary. The first hours of the relentless rain had already cut the power to her modest home, leaving her in the dim light of a few candles flickering with the wind invading the cracks in the walls. The old radio on the coffee table announced the severity of the situation. The voice, crackling with static, warned of possible landslides on the slopes, but Eleanor remained firm in her decision not to abandon the only home she had known for the past 40 years. A sudden crash broke her thoughts. The floor trembled beneath her feet, and before she could reach the door, part of the side wall collapsed, bringing with it an avalanche of mud, rocks, and branches that completely blocked her exit. In the blink of an eye, the elderly woman found herself trapped in a labyrinth of debris. A heavy beam pinned her right leg against the floor, not hard enough to break it, but enough to prevent any attempt at freeing herself. Her phone, thrown to the ground by the impact, lay useless a few feet away. A cruel irony of fate placing salvation so close and yet so unreachable. Silent tears streamed down her wrinkled face as her lips murmured prayers learned in childhood, asking not for a miracle for herself, but for strength to face whatever came next. While loneliness embraced Mrs. Eleanor in her makeshift prison in the lower part of town, three children braved the rain that was beginning to subside, venturing to the edges of Whispering Woods, a place where centuries-old trees seemed to guard secrets as ancient as creation itself. Michael, an 11-year-old boy with unruly black hair and curious eyes that constantly questioned the world around him, led the small group. Beside him, Peter, 9 years old, with freckles dancing on his face with every smile, and little Luke, only 7, whose green eyes held an inexplicable wisdom for his age, completed the trio that would soon be instruments of something much greater than they could imagine. "Let's go back. My mom's gonna be worried," argued Peter, adjusting the soaked beanie over his red hair. "Just a little longer. I want to see if I can find that hollow tree Grandpa mentioned. He said he hid treasure there when he was a kid," insisted Michael, whose adventurous spirit always outweighed prudence. Luke silently watched a blue butterfly that, defying the damp air, landed gracefully on a wet leaf. It was then that a distant bark caught his attention. "Look, a dog!" exclaimed the youngest, pointing to a canine silhouette moving among the drenched trees. The animal, a German shepherd with golden fur and black markings, stared intently at the children. There was something mysterious in its deep brown eyes, almost human in their expressiveness. Around its neck, a silver medal swung gently, reflecting the rare rays of sun managing to pierce the clouds that were beginning to dissipate. "He looks lost," commented Peter, extending a hand towards the animal which, surprisingly, neither approached nor fled, maintaining a calculated distance. "I think he wants us to follow him," observed Michael, as the dog took a few steps back, without looking away from the children. "My grandma used to say we shouldn't follow strange animals in the woods," Luke warned, his voice trembling with apprehension. She told stories about forest spirits that disguise themselves to lure unsuspecting travelers. However, curiosity overcame fear, and before they could argue further, the dog disappeared among the trees, like a shadow swallowed by the forest gloom. Without a second thought, Michael ran after it, followed by Peter, and finally by a hesitant Luke. What began as simple play quickly turned into a journey through unknown trails. Soaked branches whipped their faces as they pushed deeper into the woods. The familiar landscape of whispering woods gave way to denser, wilder vegetation. The comforting sounds of birds usually singing in that area were replaced by an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional bark of the mysterious dog, always visible in the distance, like a guiding light keeping them moving. "Michael, we're lost," stated Peter, his voice trembling slightly. The sky, previously clearing, was darkening again, now not from rain clouds, but from the advancing afternoon that would soon give way to twilight. "We're not lost," Michael replied, with more conviction in his voice than he truly felt in his heart. "We're following the dog. He must belong to someone. He'll lead us somewhere safe." Luke, the youngest and usually the quietest, stopped abruptly, pointing to the metal he could now clearly see on the neck of the animal, which had finally slowed its pace. "Look, it's St. Francis of Assisi!" he exclaimed, recognizing the image engraved on the metal. "My grandma has one just like it on her altar." The dog, as if understanding it had been noticed, sat for a moment, allowing the children to catch up. When they were almost beside it, it stood up again and continued onward, now on a steep path that began to climb a hill previously hidden by vegetation. "Where is he taking us?" asked Peter as his tired legs struggled against the slope. "I don't know, but I feel like we should keep going," replied Michael, a strange certainty growing in his chest, muffling the fear that had initially accompanied him on this impromptu journey. After nearly an hour of strenuous walking, the trio of children spotted a clearing at the top of the hill and, in its center, a partially destroyed structure. The wooden house, which must have once been welcoming, now looked like a shipwreck in a sea of mud and debris. The dog, which had kept its distance until then, ran towards the damaged building, barking insistently near an opening between the fallen boards. The children looked at each other, hesitant. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a blood red that seemed an omen of both danger and urgency. "There's someone inside," whispered Luke, whose ears caught a faint groan coming from the rubble. Michael, feeling an inexplicable call in his heart, moved towards the house, followed by the other two boys. As they approached, the sound became clearer, an almost inaudible plea for help, the fragile voice of someone whose hope was fading along with the last light of day. Carefully, the children began removing small pieces of wood and debris, creating a narrow passage through which Michael, being the slimmest of the three, managed to squeeze. The interior of the house was dim, lit only by a few rays of the setting sun penetrating the gaps in the partially collapsed roof. The smell of wet earth and rotting wood filled his nostrils as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. "Is anyone there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Here," came the weak reply, almost a sigh, from the direction where the dog was now sniffing insistently. Following the animal, Michael found Mrs. Eleanor, pale and dehydrated, trapped under debris that seemed to weigh tons for his childish arms. Without wasting time, he called Peter and Luke, who quickly joined him. Together, they managed to move enough of the debris to free the elderly woman's leg, although they lacked the strength to remove her from there without additional help. "Water," murmured the woman, her lips parched from prolonged thirst. Luke, remembering the first aid lessons he had learned at school, searched his backpack for a water bottle he always carried. Carefully, he helped the elderly woman take small sips while Peter improvised a pillow with his folded jacket. "We need to call for help," stated Michael, looking around for some means of communication. His eyes landed on an old radio communicator, placed on a shelf that miraculously remained intact. With hands trembling from a mix of fear and determination, the boy turned on the device. After a few frustrating attempts, he managed to tune into the emergency frequency his grandfather, a former member of the local emergency services, had once taught him, just in case. "Help! There's an injured lady in the house on top of the hill, past Whispering Woods," he transmitted, hoping someone was listening on the other end. After agonizing moments of static, a voice responded, confirming receipt of the message and promising to send help immediately. Relief flooded the children's hearts, but they knew they still needed to keep the elderly woman conscious and warm until rescue arrived. While they waited, Mrs. Eleanor, regaining some strength thanks to the water and unexpected company, began to speak in a weak but emotion-filled voice. You are angels," she murmured, her teary blue eyes fixed on the three young faces watching her with concern. "I prayed, asked for help, and he sent you." "It was the dog that brought us here, ma'am," explained Peter, pointing to the animal now sitting calmly near the entrance. A faint but meaningful smile formed on the elderly woman's lips. "There are no coincidences, only divine designs we don't yet understand." Michael observed the dog more closely. The metal on its neck shone almost supernaturally in the dim surroundings. There was something in the animal's gaze, an intelligence and purpose that transcended the common behavior of a simple pet. "Do you live here alone, ma'am?" asked Luke, with the innocence and curiosity typical of his age. "Yes, my little one," replied Mrs. Eleanor with a sigh that carried untold stories. "Many years ago, I chose the solitude of this hill, after a life dedicated to caring for children like you." Before she could elaborate further, the sound of approaching sirens and voices interrupted the conversation. The rescue had arrived with surprising speed, as if guided by an invisible force through the already dark forest. Paramedics, firefighters, and volunteers flooded the space, taking over the care of the elderly woman with professional efficiency. The children were gently moved aside, given blankets and hot chocolate, while they recounted their incredible journey to a police officer who noted everything with growing admiration. When asked how they had found their way to the isolated house, all three children mentioned the dog with the St. Francis medal. Strangely, no one on the rescue team had seen such an animal. When they looked around, they found that the mysterious guide had vanished without a trace, like a vision dissipating at dawn. On the makeshift stretcher, while being prepared for transport, Mrs. Eleanor grasped Michael's hand with surprising strength for her weakened state and whispered, "Look for the medal, he left it for you." Confused but obedient, the boy searched the area around the entrance, finding to his surprise the silver medal lying on a rock, as if carefully placed there. There were no paw prints, no signs of the dog, only the small object gleaming under, the faint glow of the rescuers' flashlights. As the elderly woman was taken to the hospital and the children reunited with their worried families, an extraordinary story began to circulate through the small town of Harmony Springs. The story of three lost children who, guided by a mysterious animal, became instruments of salvation for an old woman many had forgotten. Michael, however, couldn't forget the dog's gaze, nor Mrs. Eleanor's enigmatic words. He kept the medal in his pocket, feeling its weight like a responsibility he didn't fully comprehend yet, but intuitively accepted. In the following weeks, life in the small town tried to return to normal. The floodwaters receded, leaving scars on the landscape and in memories. The children returned to school, welcomed as little heroes, an attention that particularly bothered Michael, whose questioning spirit now turned to the inexplicable events of that afternoon. Michael wasn't a religious boy, ever since his grandmother had fallen seriously ill 6 months earlier. His young heart harbored a silent anger towards God. How could an all-powerful and supposedly loving being allow Grandma Evelyn, the woman who had spent her life helping everyone in the community with her knowledge of medicinal herbs, now waste away in bed, consumed by an illness that even the best doctors in the state capital couldn't name? This doubt gnawed at his faith, turning it into a shadow of resentment that grew as his grandmother's condition worsened. However, the events on the hill had planted a seed of doubt in his skepticism, not about God's existence, he had never truly doubted that, but about his nature and purposes. One Sunday afternoon, a month after the rescue, Michael decided to visit Mrs. Eleanor, who was now recovering in her partially rebuilt house, thanks to the efforts of the local community. He brought the medal with him, which he had kept hidden in a small wooden box under his bed. The path up the hill, now marked by colorful ribbons tied to trees by the workers helping with the reconstruction, seemed completely different in daylight, without the fear and uncertainty that had accompanied him the first time. Still, each step awakened vivid memories of the mysterious dog guiding them through the forest. Upon reaching the clearing, Michael found the house transformed. The walls had been rebuilt, the roof replaced, and a small garden was beginning to take shape around the structure. In its center, a figure bent by time but with precise movements, Mrs. Eleanor planted aromatic herb, seedlings in newly prepared beds. "I knew you would come, Michael," the elderly woman said without turning, as if her eyes could see beyond matter. "A restless heart like yours wouldn't rest until it found answers." Surprised by the woman's perception, the boy approached hesitantly, extending the small box in his hands. "I brought the medal we found that day," he explained, carefully observing the elderly woman's reaction. Mrs. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and, with a serene smile, accepted the object. Her trembling fingers opened the box, revealing the silver medal that shone intensely under the afternoon sun. "Come, we have much to talk about," she invited, heading towards a rustic wooden bench positioned under the generous shade of an ancient tree that had miraculously survived the flood. Sitting side by side, the elderly woman held the medal up to the light, revealing a Latin inscription engraved on its back. "Lumen in tenebris," light in darkness. "This medal," began Mrs. Eleanor, her voice thick with emotion, "was a gift I gave to my husband, Anthony, on our wedding day, more than 40 years ago. He always carried it with him, until the day he disappeared during a storm much like the one that almost took my life." Michael listened intently, feeling that each word from the elderly woman carried layers of meaning his young heart was just beginning to grasp. "Anthony was a forest ranger," she continued, stroking the surface of the medal with her fingertips. "He knew every trail, every tree in these woods. That day he went out to check for possible landslides on the mountain slopes and never returned. They searched for weeks, but his body was never found." "Do you think the dog—" Michael began, unable to finish the question that seemed absurd. Even in his thoughts, "I don't know what to think, my child," replied Mrs. Eleanor with an enigmatic smile. "But I've learned that the Lord's ways are mysterious, and sometimes he uses unexpected instruments to carry out his work." The silence that followed was heavy with possibilities, with questions lacking clear answers, but also with a strange peace Michael couldn't explain. The elderly woman, sensing the boy's internal struggle, continued her story. "Before coming to this hill, I spent 30 years as a nun at the convent of the Sisters of Mercy in the capital," she revealed, surprising Michael. "I left religious life not for lack of faith, but because I felt a different calling. There were orphaned children who needed care, a home, someone to love them unconditionally. I founded a small shelter with Anthony's help, whom I met during charity work." Her words conjured images of a life dedicated to service, to unconditional love that transcends conventions and social expectations. "For 20 years, we cared for dozens of children who passed through our lives. Some stayed with us for weeks, others for years. All left marks on our hearts. When Anthony passed, I continued the work for a few more years, until age and circumstances forced me to close the shelter. The children were relocated, and I retreated to this hill, seeking peace in my final years." Michael listened intently, fascinated by the story of the woman who, initially, seemed just a lonely old lady, but now revealed herself as a life rich in purpose and meaning. "Can I ask you something, Mrs. Eleanor?" Michael finally said. "Of course, my child. Do you still believe in, after everything you've been through, after losing your husband like that? Do you still believe in God?" The question, so simple yet so profound, hung in the air like a leaf, hesitating before touching the ground. The elderly woman's blue eyes, windows to a soul that had seen both heaven and hell on this earth, fixed on the distant horizon. "I believe, Michael. Not with the blind faith of youth, which expects only miracles and happiness. I believe with the mature faith of someone who has weathered storms and seen the light on the other side." a faith that accepts both mysteries and pains, and yet chooses to trust. Her words touched something deep in the boy's heart, a chord that had vibrated silently since the day of the rescue. "My grandma is dying," he finally confessed, the tears he had suppressed for months finally finding their way down his still childish cheeks. "The doctors say there's nothing more they can do. How can I believe in a God who allows this?" Mrs. Eleanor offered no easy answers or empty comforts. Instead, she extended her wrinkled hand and firmly held the boy's small, trembling hand. "Suffering is not a punishment, Michael. It's part of the mystery of life, as inexplicable as the love we feel for those who are departing. Your grandmother, from what you tell me, lived a life of service and love. Her passing will bring pain, inevitably, but it will also leave a legacy of light that you will carry within you." They talked for hours that afternoon, sharing stories, tears, and eventually, smiles. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with the same colors as that fateful day, Michael realized something had changed within him. Not a complete resolution of his doubts, but the beginning of a different journey. A path of reconciliation with questions that might never have definitive answers. Before he left, the elderly woman handed him a book with a worn cover. "This is my diary," she explained. "I started writing it in my early days at the convent when I was little older than you. Perhaps you'll find some answers in it, or at least better questions." Michael accepted the gift reverently, feeling its weight as a testament of trust he could not betray. "Come back next week," invited Mrs. Eleanor. "Bring your friends. There's much work to be done on the reconstruction, and my old bones appreciate the help of young, strong hands." In the days that followed, Michael devoured the yellowed pages of the diary. To his surprise, he found not only accounts of a life dedicated to faith and service, but also doubts, questions, and spiritual struggles that mirrored his own. Mrs. Eleanor hadn't always been the serene, wise woman he knew. She too had fought internal battles, faced crises of faith and moments of despair. One passage in particular caught his attention, dated 30 years earlier. "I had the dream again today. I see myself old and alone, trapped in rubble after a great storm. Hours pass, turning into days, and hope slips away like water through fingers. Then, when all seems lost, I hear children's voices. 3 little angels following the guardian emerge from the darkness, bringing light and salvation. I always wake up at the same point, with the inexplicable certainty that this is not just a dream, but a vision of what is to come. If it's true, I still have much to live, much to face, and when the time comes, I will know that I am not alone in my trial." Michael's hands trembled as he read those lines, written decades before his birth. The possibility that his encounter with Mrs. Eleanor was not mere coincidence, but part of a larger plan, a design drawn beyond human comprehension, was simultaneously frightening and comforting. The following week, as promised, Michael returned to the hill, this time accompanied by Peter and Luke. Together, they helped rebuild the garden, paint the exterior walls, and make small repairs beyond the elderly woman's capabilities. Between tasks, Mrs. Eleanor shared stories of her life in the convent, at the orphanage, and eventually, about the special properties of Harmony Springs thermal waters. "These springs," she explained, as the 4 rested in the shade after a morning of hard work, "are not ordinary. The ancient Native American inhabitants of this region considered them portals to the spiritual world. The first settlers, devout Christians, reinterpreted this belief, seeing the waters as a manifestation of divine grace." "Is that why the town is called Harmony Springs?" asked Luke, always fascinated by stories and legends. "Exactly," confirmed the elderly woman. "The healing properties of these waters attracted people from all over, seeking relief from pains of the body and soul. The tradition of the annual Springs Festival, which we celebrate yearly, has its roots in this ancient history." My mom said, "This year's festival will be even bigger," commented Peter, munching on an apple offered by their host. "They say they're going to honor us as the little heroes of Harmony Springs." Michael rolled his eyes, visibly uncomfortable with the attention received since the rescue. "We didn't do anything special. Anyone would have helped." "Don't be modest, Michael. gently chided Mrs. Eleanor. The extraordinary rarely comes in obvious packages. Sometimes it's the seemingly simple gestures that carry the greatest power for transformation. Visits to the hill became routine in the following weeks. What began as a gesture of kindness transformed into a genuine bond between the three children and the elderly woman. Mrs. Eleanor, with her serene wisdom and captivating stories, offered a perspective none of them found in their own families or at school. For Michael, especially, those moments on the hill became a refuge, a space where he could freely express his doubts and fears about his grandmother's illness, who continued to decline despite treatments. 2 months after the rescue, something unexpected happened. During science class, Michael had the idea to take a water sample from the spring near Mrs. Eleanor's house for analysis at the school science fair. The elderly woman had mentioned that this specific spring, smaller and lesser known than the town's main tourist attractions, possessed unique properties. With the help of Peter and Luke, he collected the water in sterilized vials provided by the teacher. Upon subjecting the sample to basics tests available in the school lab, the results surprised even the skeptical Mr. Harrison, their teacher. "This mineral composition is unusual," commented the educator, adjusting his glasses while examining the results. "There are concentrations of elements that usually don't appear together in nature. It would be interesting to send a sample to a better-equipped lab in the capital." Michael's scientific curiosity was piqued, but also something deeper. That night, upon returning home, he took a little of the water in a small flask. After a moment's hesitation, he entered the room where his grandmother rested, weaker and more distant each day. "Grandma," he called softly, approaching the bed, "I brought something for you to try." Grandma Evelyn opened her tired eyes, a faint smile lighting up her face upon recognizing her beloved grandson. Carefully, Michael helped her drink a few sips of the crystal-clear water. "It tastes different," commented the elderly woman, her voice weak. "Sweet, like the water from the North Hill Spring, where we used to walk when you were little." Michael said nothing, just held his grandmother's frail hand, offering presence and love when words seemed insufficient. That night he slept in the armchair beside the bed, a habit he had developed since the illness worsened. The next morning he was awakened by something he hadn't heard in weeks, his grandmother's voice, stronger, calling his name. Opening his eyes, he found Grandma Evelyn sitting up in bed, with a color in her face that had vanished months ago. "I'm hungry," she announced, with a sparkle in her eyes Michael thought he would never see again. In the following days, Grandma Evelyn's improvement continued, baffling the doctors. It wasn't a complete cure, the illness was still present, but there was an inexplicable revitalization, a renewed strength that allowed for small pleasures previously denied by her weakness. Michael began regularly bringing water from the spring for his grandmother, watching with contained joy each small progress. He told no one about his alternative medication, fearing he might be forbidden to continue, or worse, that it might create false hope if the improvement was only temporary. During this period, the relationship between Michael and Mrs. Eleanor deepened further. The boy started confiding his innermost thoughts to the elderly woman, including his grandmother's surprising improvement after starting to drink the spring water. "I'm not surprised," commented the former nun, as they both worked in the new medicinal herb garden. That specific spring has always been considered special, even among the already miraculous waters of Harmony Springs. The ancients called it Heaven's Tears, believing it was a point where rainwater mixed with divine essence before emerging. On the surface, "Do you think the water is really healing my grandma?" asked Michael, torn between hope and the fear of believing in something science couldn't explain. "I believe healing comes in many forms, Michael," replied Mrs. Eleanor, with her usual balance of faith and practical wisdom, sometimes through modern medicine, sometimes through elements of nature whose properties we don't yet fully understand, and always through the love we dedicate to those who suffer. 3 months after the rescue, as the entire town prepared for the traditional annual Springs Festival, an unexpected event shattered the newly established tranquility. A violent storm, not as devastating as the one that nearly took Mrs. Eleanor's life, but strong enough to cause concern, once again isolated the house on the hill. Michael, visiting the elderly woman that day, found himself trapped by the raging nature, unable to return to town until conditions improved. What could have been cause for panic turned into a unique opportunity for learning and connection. For 3 days, isolated from the rest of the world, Michael and Mrs. Eleanor lived an experience of intense sharing. The elderly woman, sensing that this moment had been granted for a greater purpose, decided to pass on to the boy knowledge guarded by generations in her family. "You have a gift, Michael," she said, while teaching the boy to identify medicinal plants in her garden, even under the persistent rain. "A heart that questions but also knows how to listen. It's a rare and precious combination." On nights lit only by candles, Mrs. Eleanor shared ancient prayers, not the formal ones taught in churches, but simple, powerful invocations passed down through generations, connecting the supplicant directly with the divine. "These are not magic formulas," she explained, watching intently as Michael repeated the words. "They are doors, openings for a deeper dialogue with what exists beyond our limited understanding." On the morning of the 4th day, when the storm finally subsided, allowing rescue teams to reach the hill to check on the elderly woman's well-being, they found Michael and Mrs. Eleanor calmly sipping tea on the rebuilt porch, as if those days of isolation had been just a brief parenthesis in their normal routines. The return to town was marked by a surprising revelation. During his absence, Michael discovered that his mother, worried about his disappearance, had resorted to every possible means to find him, including visiting Grandma Evelyn at the hospital to check if her grandson had been there. During this visit, something extraordinary happened. His mother, observing the remarkable improvement in her grandmother's health, questioned what could have caused such a change. In a moment of candor, Grandma Evelyn mentioned the water Michael had been bringing regularly. "Water from where?" asked the mother, intrigued. "From the North Hill Spring by the Taste," replied the elderly woman. "The same one we visited when Michael was a child. The same one your mother, my daughter Teresa, said cured her persistent cough when she was only 5. This seemingly casual comment established a connection Michael could never have imagined. His mother, surprised, revealed something she had never shared with her son. As a child, she herself had been one of the orphans temporarily sheltered by Mrs. Eleanor and Anthony after losing her parents in an accident. "I stayed with them for almost 2 years, until your grandmother, my aunt, who then lived in the capital, could take me in," she told Michael upon his return. "Mrs. Eleanor was like a mother to me during that time. When I grew up and moved to Harmony Springs, I never imagined that the same lady lived isolated on the hill, without me knowing her identity." This revelation created a new meaning for the connection between Michael and the elderly woman. It wasn't just a fortuitous friendship born from an unlikely rescue, but a reunion of souls already connected across generations, a circle completing itself through time and circumstances. "Why did you never tell me?" Michael asked Mrs. Eleanor at the first opportunity he had to visit her, after discovering this family connection. The elderly woman smiled, her eyes shining with the quiet wisdom only years can bestow. "Some truths need to be discovered at the right time, Michael. If I had revealed this connection immediately, you would have visited me out of obligation, out of a sense of family duty. Instead, you came by choice, moved by your own curiosity and compassion. That made our relationship truer, more meaningful." As the date of the annual Springs Festival approached, marking 5 months since the rescue, the entire town buzzed with preparations. This year, the event would hold special significance, not only celebrating the miraculous waters that gave the community its name and purpose, but also honoring the extraordinary rescue many now considered a true miracle. Michael, Peter, and Luke, initially uncomfortable with the attention, began to accept their role in the narrative that was now part of local history. However, something troubled Michael's conscience. During a preparatory meeting for the festival, he overheard comments about Mayor Robert Miller's ambitious plans for the future of the thermal springs. "This year will be just the beginning," commented the politician, surrounded by out-of-town businessmen. "Wait until the next festival, when our partnership with Aqua Global is already implemented. Harmony Springs will cease to be just a regional tourist destination and become an international brand of bottled mineral water. Those words sent a chill down Michael's spine. Later, sharing his concerns with Mrs. Eleanor, he found the same apprehension in the elderly woman. Commercial exploitation of these waters would be a disaster, she stated, with a gravity Michael had rarely witnessed. It's not just a matter of environmental preservation, although that alone would be reason enough for concern. It's something deeper. What do you mean? Questioned Michael, feeling he was about to receive an important revelation. Mrs. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, as if assessing whether the boy was ready for the full truth. The time has come to entrust you with the secret I've guarded throughout my adult life, she finally decided. The waters of Harmony Springs are not mere thermal springs with medicinal properties. They are part of an ancestral balance, a pact between the physical and spiritual worlds, dating back to times preceding our historical understanding. In the following days, the elderly woman shared with Michael knowledge that had been entrusted to few people over generations. As the last survivor of a small group of guardians, men and women who dedicated their lives to protecting the secret of the waters, Mrs. Eleanor saw in Michael, Peter, and Luke not just her saviors, but the next bearers of this legacy. The dog with the St. Francis medal was no coincidence, she explained. In every generation, when a guardian is in danger or when the waters themselves are threatened, the guide appears, leading those chosen to continue the mission. Michael absorbed this information with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. Part of him, the rational boy raised in the age of science and technology, resisted accepting such mystical concepts. Another part, the one that had experienced his grandmother's inexplicable improvement, that had witnessed the mysterious dog disappear, leaving only the medal, was open to possibilities transcending his logical understanding. "What can we do?" he finally asked, accepting the implicit call in the elderly woman's words. "We're just kids. How can we stop the mayor and this company from exploiting the waters?" Mrs. Eleanor's smile carried centuries of accumulated wisdom. "Sometimes, Michael, it is precisely the youngest and seemingly weakest voices that carry the greatest strength. You three have already been instruments of something greater when you saved me. Now you are called again, this time to save something that belongs not only to this generation, but to all who come after us." With Mrs. Eleanor's careful guidance, the three boys began investigating the documented history of the springs. In the basement of the house on the hill, protected from moisture by preservation techniques the former nun learned during her years in the convent, they found documents dating back to the 19th century, including an old town charter declaring the waters of Harmony Springs as public trust property, protected from exclusive commercial exploitation. "These documents have been presented to authorities in the past," explained Mrs. Eleanor. "But in every generation, those driven by greed emerge, trying to find legal loopholes to bypass the protection. Until now, the guardians have always managed to prevent it. This time, however, the threat is more sophisticated, backed by powerful economic interests and political influence." Michael shared the discoveries with Peter and Luke, who quickly joined the cause. Together, they recruited other classmates, forming a small army of children determined to protect their town's natural and cultural heritage. "We need help from adults too," pondered Peter, always the most pragmatic of the group. "Nobody takes kids seriously in political matters." "Not all adults are on the mayor's side," argued Luke. "My dad always criticized development plans that ignore local traditions, and he knows other business owners who think the same." Thus, in the weeks leading up to the annual Springs Festival, a remarkable alliance began to form. Led by three children now carrying the unofficial title of Junior Guardians of the Springs, residents of all ages united around a common goal: protecting the true spirit of Harmony Springs. The strategy was simple but potentially powerful. During the festival's main ceremony, when the mayor would officially announce the partnership with Aqua Global, the three boys would lead an alternative presentation, revealing to the community and visitors the true history of the waters, supported by historical documents and testimonies collected from people who experienced inexplicable healings over the decades. On the eve of the big day, As final preparations were underway, Michael paid a final visit to Mrs. Eleanor, seeking both guidance and blessing for the challenge ahead. "I'm scared," he confessed, sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the valley where the town lay, already illuminated by the festival's colorful lights. "What if we fail? What if nobody listens to us?" The elderly woman, who seemed to have rejuvenated in recent months, reanimated by renewed purpose and the children's company, gently stroked the boy's hair. "Fear is not the absence of courage, Michael. It's the recognition of what's at stake. Remember what we learned together. We act as instruments of something greater than ourselves. The final outcome is beyond our control, but the integrity of our actions is entirely in our hands." With these words echoing in his mind, Michael returned to town, where Peter and Luke awaited him for the final adjustments to their presentation. The night was long, filled with both enthusiasm and apprehension, murmured prayers, and careful reviews of historical facts. The dawn of the annual Springs Festival brought a surprisingly clear day for that time of year. The entire town breathed anticipation, streets decorated with blue ribbons symbolizing the sacred waters, makeshift altars on every corner offering space for candles, and thanks for blessings received. The main ceremony was scheduled for noon, in the natural amphitheater formed by the gentle slopes surrounding the main spring. Hours earlier, people were already gathering, seeking the best spots. Among the crowd, discreetly positioned according to plan, were the allies recruited by the E Trio, respected community elders, influential merchants, esteemed teachers, and most importantly, ordinary people whose healing stories would be the most powerful evidence. When Mayor Robert Miller took the improvised stage, accompanied by executives in suits who clashed with the traditional festive atmosphere, Michael felt his heart race. The moment had arrived. The political speech began predictably, with praise for tradition and promises of prosperity. When the mayor finally introduced the topic of the Aqua Global Partnership, presenting it as the glorious future of Harmony Springs, the signal was given. Michael, Peter, and Luke advanced down the central aisle, followed by about 50 children, each carrying a small vial of water from the different springs in the region. The unexpected movement interrupted the speech, all eyes turning to the children's procession, now positioned before the stage. "Mr. Mayor," Michael began, his voice initially trembling but gaining firmness with each word, "before irreversible decisions are made about the future of our waters, we would like to share their true story with everyone present." What followed was an extraordinary presentation. Each child presented a different aspect of the historical, cultural, and spiritual importance of Harmony Springs' sources. Documents were displayed on pre-prepared panels, proof of the legal protection established over a century earlier. Luke, with his natural storytelling talent, recounted the rescue of Mrs. Eleanor, emphasizing the mysterious role of the dog with the St. Francis medal. Peter, methodical and precise, presented the preliminary results of tests conducted on the waters of the North Hill Spring, highlighting properties that defied conventional scientific explanations. Finally, at the climax of the presentation, Michael gave voice to those who had personally experienced the healing effects of the waters. One by one, residents of different ages shared emotional testimonies, culminating with Grandma Evelyn, Michael's grandmother, who surprised everyone by walking onto the stage on her own legs, something doctors had deemed impossible just months before. "We are not against progress," concluded Michael, looking directly into the eyes of the visibly uncomfortable mayor. "We favor progress that honors the past, protects the present, and preserves for the future what makes Harmony Springs truly special." The silence that followed was broken by an isolated clap, which quickly turned into a standing ovation. The mayor's red face and the disgruntled expressions of the Aqua Global executives showed the impact of the intervention. Confronted with clearly manifested public opinion and documented evidence of legal protection that couldn't be easily circumvented, Robert Miller had no choice but to announce the reconsideration of the project, promising broader public consultations before any final decision. It was a victory, albeit possibly temporary, As the traditional celebration continued now with renewed meaning, Michael, Peter, and Luke received thanks and congratulations from the community. However, for Michael, the true conclusion of that extraordinary journey would come later. At sunset, as previously agreed, the three boys climbed the hill to share the outcome with Mrs. Eleanor. They found her in the garden, as usual, but there was something different in her expression, a serenity transcending ordinary contentment, a light in her eyes seeming to reflect something beyond the orange twilight sky. "You did it," she stated, even before they could report the events. "The waters are safe, at least for this generation." The boys nodded, still processing the magnitude of what they had accomplished. "How did you know it would work out?" asked Luke, always the first to voice the questions lingering in the minds of the three. "Because you were chosen," she replied simply. "Just as I was many decades ago. Just as others were before me. The cycle continues, and you are now part of it." As they talked, recalling the decisive moments of that extraordinary day, a movement at the edge of the garden caught Michael's attention. There, partially hidden by the growing shadows, stood a dog with golden fur marked by black patches, identical to the one that had guided them months earlier. When his eyes met the animal's, Michael felt an inexplicable connection, a recognition transcending words. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the dog smiled, an almost human gesture in its expressiveness. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the animal turned and disappeared into the forest, beginning to be swallowed by night. "Did you see that?" Michael asked, turning to the others. Peter and Luke looked in the indicated direction but just shook their heads, confused. Mrs. Eleanor, however, smiled with understanding. "The guide appears only to those who need to see him," she explained softly. "And only when there is a greater purpose involved." That night, returning to town under a starry sky, Michael finally understood the true nature of what they had experienced over the past 6 months. It wasn't just a series of extraordinary coincidences, nor simply the product of incomprehensible supernatural forces. It was the manifestation of something existing in the space between faith and reason, between the tangible and the mystery. The recognition that every person, regardless of age or circumstance, can be an instrument of transformation when acting, moved by purposes greater than self-interest. The journey that began with 3 lost children following a mysterious dog had completed a perfect circle. Michael, who had questioned his faith after his grandmother's illness, found not definitive answers, but a different way of relating to the divine, not through absolute certainties, but through humble acceptance of mystery and commitment to actions honoring the interdependence of all living things. The healing waters of Harmony Springs would continue to flow freely, offering their blessings to those seeking them with a sincere heart. And 3 children, now transformed by the shared experience, would carry with them the legacy of a wise elderly woman and the responsibility to become, each in their own way, instruments of hope in a world always in need of healing and redemption. The festival lights twinkled far below in the valley. Michael firmly gripped the St. Francis medal he now always carried, no longer as an object of superstition or a magic talisman, but as a constant reminder that the truest miracles happen through human hands that allow themselves to be guided by something greater, whether that something is called God, destiny, or simply the best of our own shared humanity.